want to welcome everybody to a unique Rubin webinar. We've done these sessions for over 2 years now. This is the first time we've done one that's not about a job, exploring a career. We felt it was important to hit pause on that and dive into the world of AI, artificial intelligence, and what it means for the future of writing skills and education and learning in general. And I am grateful to have two experts, two thought leaders in the field, Dr. Christopher Basgier and Anna Mills. Dr. Basgier is the Director of University Writing at Auburn University in Alabama. And Anna Mills is an English professor and a textbook writer from the College of Marin in California. And we will talk to them in just a moment and dive into this conversation. And we also have Wendy Crawford here, our sign language interpreter. Thank you, Wendy, for being here. Before we dive into that conversation, I have some housekeeping notes to share. So I want to first do that and run through some news and notes. So I'm sharing my screen. The first thing I want to share is actually related to where I'm sitting right now. How many of you, can I see a show of hands? How many of you knew that over the last 2 months, we ran a national contest called America's Next Great Intern? Can I see any hands? Okay. Dr. Basgier knew. So we held a national contest having students compete on employability skills. We have a national winner. Her name is Bezawit Abate. She has been in America 7 months, moved here from Ethiopia. She won our national contest. She obtained the most votes in our public voting round, which was the month of March. And we actually, this morning, 2 hours ago, we did an award presentation for her and her teacher at her high school in Dumfries, Virginia, which is south of Washington, D.C. And I am currently sitting in the break room of the library of the high school where we did the presentation. So I am on location. We did it this morning and it was wonderful. And I said, oh, we got to do the webinar too. So I found a spot in the school and here I sit. So we're making it happen. And she is our national winner. And we would love for all of you to participate next year. So here's the website, bookmark it, hang on to it. You'll see emails from us when we get closer to February of next year, but the contest is coming back. We had a great response and it's coming back. So keep an eye out for next year's contest. Please participate in middle school or high school. You're all welcome. We're going to have even bigger prizes and bigger stakes next year. That's our intention. So I wanted to bring you up to speed on our contest because it just happened a couple hours ago. Now, the other thing that we always like to do in our sessions is we love to give out free resources. This is one we've given out in the past, but it's been a little while. So we're bringing it back. Email etiquette resources. Can I see some hands from teachers? How many teachers, how many students have emailed you like a text message? The email looks like a text. So we help to teach students to be professional and courteous and appropriate. And we have a Google Drive folder of some free resources for how to make a professional email address, a subject line, addressing teachers and employers appropriately, and even more skills than that. And again, if you've never received that free resource from us and you'd like it, here's all you need to do. Go to the chat right now, type the word interested and your email address. Interested and your email address. If you are new to the Rubin community, what we like to do is reach you by phone tomorrow or Friday for 5 minutes to say hello, learn what you do, and help you reach this Google folder and explore it. So again, if you would like these resources and you're new to us, interested in your email address, and we'll send you a quick invite for tomorrow. So you can continue to do that. I want to keep it moving so we get to our guests. If you're watching this on a recording, many teachers do, you can still have the same email resources. Just send us an email to the email on the page. And two last things. We have one more Dream Job webinar for the this academic year. It's on May 9th in two weeks or so, talking to a welder. So please plan to join us. We'll have information on that with the link to the Zoom very soon. And finally, everybody joining us today will receive a certificate in your email on Thursday that you were here, proof that you were here and you were part of today's conversation. And I will remind you of all these things at the end, but hopefully that's kind of runs us through our housekeeping. And now I want to jump back to the topic of the day, which is AI and the future of education. So let's begin by having our guests introduce themselves and tell us what they do. I'll start with Anna. So Anna, tell us your role at the school and also how you connect to AI and writing.
Okay, great. So I've been teaching community college for 18 years now, and I teach writing, and I did a textbook on writing. And so when I discovered what was possible, generation of text that is not copied from any other source, that sounds plausible. And I discovered that sort of back in June. It was pretty astounding, sort of scary and exciting and unsettling and all those things. So I really dove in, and I'm coming from the open education community. My textbook is sort of open and free. And so what I did was to create a resource area for the Writing Across the Curriculum Clearinghouse. The idea was just, let's share resources, turn toward each other, figure this out together. And so, I've been doing that, and I've been writing about it and giving workshops as well. And I think it is sort of tremendously exciting, but also, there's just a lot of uncertainty. So I think we need to, nobody's got all the answers here.
Right. That's right. We're going to get a little further today, right? And it's just one of many conversations that we'll have. Thank you. And Dr. Basgier, give us your introduction, please.
Yeah, first, I just wanted to say thanks to Danny and the Rubin team for inviting me. This is a fun topic to talk about. Also, love having the interpreter on hand. Great accessibility practice, something that's near and dear to my heart and something we try to do in my office, which is the Office of University Writing, or as we just shorten it to University Writing at Auburn. And we are a comprehensive writing across the curriculum, writing in the disciplines program, and a writing center. So that means that we have both a student-focused mission and a faculty-focused mission. On the student side, we offer tutoring services for students who want help with any kind of writing at any stage of the writing process. And then the core of my particular role is working with faculty to help them integrate high impact, meaningful writing assignments, no matter the discipline. So I work with biologists, business faculty, English faculty, folks in the human sciences, so on and so forth. And that faculty focused work is primarily how I came to this. So, like Anna, when ChatGPT kind of hit the scene back in the fall in November, I started taking a look at it, talking with some of the other administrators that I work with, and thinking about what kind of support can we offer and what do we need to know about this in terms of how it's going to impact teaching in the collegiate level. So put together a faculty learning community where we sort of explored the ins and outs of it, and been doing a lot of departmental visits as well. So I think I have a pretty good read on what's happening, at least currently, and what faculty are thinking in the college space about the impacts that it's having on the way that they're teaching and the kind of professional goals that they have for their students as well.
Okay, that's great. And I want to get into that and learn what you're learning. As we start our conversation, I want to welcome all the attendees. Please start putting your own questions in the Q&A along the bottom of Zoom. Put your questions, put your name and your school or your organization so we can give you credit for the question. So start with your questions, and we'll start the three of us talking about this. Anna, when it seemed like ChatGPT, OpenAI had been working on the tool for a while, but it didn't really reach sort of mass consumption until they put out that free version, and it sort of caught fire on the internet and made its way to schools soon after. What was the experience like at your school and even in your own classroom when the technology kind of abruptly sort of showed up?
Well, I think my students were not fully aware of it, but we had been reading about language models and AI as sort of a theme of the course. And so I was the one trying to figure out, how much should we focus on this and how much should I tell them about it? And I think they were much more conservative than I was, as to, they were saying, I don't think other students should use this. It's only cheating. It jeopardizes your academic career. And so I was a bit surprised that more weren't already jumping on it. But I think it was important to me that we were already sort of building this critical AI literacy and understanding the pitfalls and the mistakes that these systems make, and looking at examples of that, watching videos about that, discussing readings about it. So we were sort of building this foundation for them to understand what this is. So it doesn't just seem like an oracle or like a new god or something. So that they can imagine how it's a statistical model. It predicts what humans might say next.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for that. And Chris, tell me what Dr. Basgier, excuse me, we go back a few years, it's habit. What are you hearing from faculty? We've been through this now for a few months, kind of like maybe one semester-ish of sort of grappling with the tool. What's the tone? What's the pulse from faculty in your world?
There's a fair amount of variability, actually. Most people, I think, have gotten out of the panic stage a little bit. When I do departmental visits, one of the first things I'll do is I'll bring up ChatGPT on the screen and I'll say, give me a prompt that's related to your field, and we'll input it, and they'll see how fast it starts producing an answer. And they're like, kind of shock and awe. But then I'll say, okay, now let's look at it again. Where do you see like good ideas here? Or where do you see thinking here? And they'll read it and say, well, there's not much actually in the way of like ideas or thinking there. It's tends to be, especially on an initial production, it tends to be fairly what I call high level, like Wikipedia level text production. It takes actually a fair amount of working with it to get to something that's going to be more detail oriented, more specific to a domain, like a discipline or a profession or a field, in my experience. I'll give a quick example of that. I was working with showing it off to aerospace engineering faculty, and they said, let's ask it, how would you calculate the aerodynamics of a Frisbee? Great question, right? So we asked it that, and it produced an answer, and they said, well, okay, it's correct, but it's not really the way that like an engineer would talk about the aerodynamics of a Frisbee. So then we said, okay, rewrite that like an engineer. And it kind of rewrote it like an engineer. It sounded a little more technical, was a little more concise. I said, well, it's better, but it's not very mathematical. So I said, okay, let's ask it to do a formula. And so it put in a formula. Turned out the formula was wrong. Right. So so it can sound good, but maybe can't actually get to those more technical elements easily.
Or maybe not yet. Right.
Not yet.
It's still early enough that it's still rudimentary. By the way, I see some folks putting questions in the chat. Can you please put your questions in the Q&A so they don't get lost in the chat? But I will ask the question that Margaret Sullivan posed, and Anna, I'll pose it to you first. She said, what are the benefits of including generative AI in our academic integrity policy, which is already broad enough to cover emerging tech? Like, how should academic standards change to include AI, reject AI? I mean, how much should we let it in versus making a hard rule that ChatGPT should never enter our classroom versus let's find, creative ways to use it? Where do you stand on that?
Well, that's interesting that I see the two questions in there. First of all, I think that it's a great point that it is valuable to explicitly address it in policy statements. For a couple of reasons. It shows students that we know it's out there. We know that they might be trying to figure out how it fits into the existing landscape of plagiarism and other practices. And I think developing the policy is an opportunity to have those conversations, both at an individual, departmental, and institutional level. And the policy is also a chance to help educate students about why you would or wouldn't want to use text generation AI. And my big message is transparency. So I think it's okay if teachers want to create assignments that involve it, that meet your learning goals. I think that's okay as long as you're looking at things like student privacy and data concerns. But what I would want to see is we still need to know what has the student actually done. We still need to assess what are they thinking and learning, right? So in my mind, we need to know what text is AI and what is put together by the students, whether they're using it or not. And so the big question is, how do you establish that transparency? But at least the policy can call for, if you follow the instructions to use AI or not, and then if you use it, label it. Those to me are the bottom line points that I would put in my policy.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Dr. Basgier, is ChatGPT and all the evolutions to come, is it going to kill writing, or can it help us become better writers? Is the essay dead, or is this an opportunity to reinvigorate how we teach writing?
I think that we can make the opportunity that we choose to make with it. If we continue to assign the same old writing assignments, I think that we're not doing what we need to be doing to adapt. But I think we can respond and make use of either active use or critical use of the development of generative AI. And by that, I mean either actively encouraging students to transparently use it in the ways that Anna had alluded to, and then to reflect on that, or to look at it as kind of an object of inquiry, to think about what is it, how does it work, how is it going to impact a particular field or particular subject area for better and for worse. I'm kind of thinking about this as being AI literacy. We need to know what it is, and we can write about those things, even if we're not actively making use of it.
Anna, what about the idea that has been circulating in educational circles about when now we're only going to have them do writing in the classroom, like where we can see them, or by hand instead of computer. So like once we have no control over what's being produced, if we don't have eyes on it, do you think that needs to be where we go, or should there still be work assigned outside of class and there's a trust factor, or there's academic standards? Like, where do we go on that?
Yeah, I think that it's too limited because writing, we don't assign writing to get the product. We assign writing because it enables, a thinking process that that needs to extend beyond what you can do in class time, ideally. So I would say, yeah, we can do maybe some in-class writing. I'm skeptical of having writing be very different in the classroom than it will be outside the classroom. Okay. But I think there are a set of things we can do to deter misuse of AI when students are writing outside the classroom.
Like what?
So, I mean, these are things I think Dr. Basgier is going to, maybe even be more an expert in terms of coming from a writing across the curriculum background, but things that are already best practices in writing instruction, like assigning steps in the writing process, really designing for student engagement and some student choice around what they're writing about, a sense of meaning and purpose, and really writing for their peers, doing peer review of their drafts, and having conferences with students where we're communicating with them about their writing. And so I think that all these things make it sort of less appealing and less necessary to recur to AI. And I think that, we can talk about AI text detection, but that's also not a silver bullet. It's not fully reliable. And that's kind of an adversarial relationship with students if we're just saying, well, we're just going to check for whether you've done AI. And especially since we know there can be false accusations based on that. Sometimes those systems will flag something as AI when it is not, when it's actually the student's words. So I think like a set of strategies that are really good teaching strategies anyway are the things that will help deter cheating with AI. And that in combination with maybe some in-class writing. If we're getting to know our students and their writing styles in a lot of different contexts, then we can have a conversation and they kind of know that if they just turn in something that's in a totally different voice, that's not even their ideas, that it's going to be apparent.
I want to just, Eric Briggs had asked from Oregon Charter Academy had asked about, you spoke to it, like is about putting tags on AI generated language to distinguish, but you're saying, it's not that cut and dry. So I wanted to thank you, Eric, for that question. Dr. Basgier, do you have anything to add to that? Like, do we embrace it? Do we really work more on that one-on-one with the student to really help them versus just trying to tell them, don't ever touch that tool? Is it more collaborative now? Where is it going in your mind?
I think it's going to vary a lot, or at least somewhat by field, right? So, for example, I'm seeing a lot of use of it, very active use in the College of Business here. And I think the reason behind that is because the business faculty see that it's going to become a valuable and pretty much pervasive tool in the business world. And so they don't think that they are doing their job if they aren't engaging students with how to use it actively. Now, that doesn't mean that they're letting their students use it to write complete pieces of text. A quick example from one of my colleagues, he teaches a management of information systems course. He had them use it to describe an emerging technology that would impact a subfield that they're interested in. And then they wrote a reflection on what it produced, it being ChatGPT. And then they created a collaborative podcast about their experience of doing it, right? So that actually goes directly back to the sort of thing Anna was talking about, sequenced assignments that have actually individualized input that get students thinking about things that are relevant to their field. And I think that that's a really great way to do it. But you can also do those things without engaging AI, and it's also going to help grow the engagement of the students in what you're doing as well.
I like that a lot. A question from Susan McNamara. She said, we taught students back in the day, which could be 6 months ago at this point, that the world's changed so much, that when citations begin taking over the body of the work, it is no longer their body of work. How does AI play out in that same conversation? If it's so much AI is embedded in the piece, how much of it is yours? Any thoughts on that? I'll start with Anna.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've seen some teachers set standards like you're allowed to use it for up to 25% of the sentences in the essay. So some people are taking that approach of setting a proportion. I think that we want to ask, why are we writing it? What do we have to say and contribute that goes beyond what these other sources have said? And remember that whatever we're getting from ChatGPT or other language models is based on other writers, human writers, right? So it's trained human writing, and it's not citing those writers. So it's kind of an amalgam of all of those ideas. So again, to get back to this, like, what's the purpose of writing? What do we actually have to add to the conversation? And if there's not much to add, then, we haven't really had a learning process, right? So I think it's worth looking at that proportion. And that gets back to the idea of labeling what is AI text and what is not, because if it's generated by AI, then it's influenced also by all those other texts that it was trained on, all those other people's ideas and writing. And it's kind of important to know that sometimes, that it wasn't put together with a human intention, that it's based on this sort of statistical analysis of lots of writing.
I would just add to that really quickly, not only why are we writing, but also I'm really fond of the idea of having students produce something like an author's note where they reflect on their use of AI. So it's not just a percentage, but it's also purpose, right? Why did you choose to rely on it? When did you choose to rely on it? That kind of reflective practice can actually emphasize their critical thinking, and their own learning how to learn as well.
That as a follow-up, and I was going to ask you about it anyway, Dr. Basgier, like, to me, the part that scares me is like removing the critical thinking from just learning, developing your brain, understanding what you're doing and why you're doing it. Like that piece, we talk a lot in our webinars about learning today for real world life skills tomorrow, just having the ability to critically think about your own life, not just academic, but just living beyond school. How do we make sure that we continue to challenge students to think hard about what they're doing and why, as these tools seem to do more and more for us? Do you have anything else to add on that critical thinking side of it?
Yeah, so some of you may have heard the idea that ChatGPT and other generative AIs can quote unquote hallucinate, which is the idea that they often fabricate information. I told you about the formula that in the aerospace one that it produced that had some right components, some wrong components. In another context, a faculty member got ChatGPT to say Joe Biden was the first Jewish president. Obviously wrong on a couple different levels, right? So then I think confronting students with the potential for those factual inaccuracies and reminding them that you are responsible for the factual content of whatever you turn in school and in the professional world, I think that's kind of where it gets down to brass tacks. And that in and of itself, in the conversations I've had with students, is enough for them to say, yeah, I'm never going to rely on this wholesale. I'm going to put what I know into it. I'm going to make sure I'm reading it closely, and I'm working with it and revising, polishing, fact checking, all of those things that are part of critical thinking as well.
So, and I don't know, either of you could answer this. Have your schools implemented any like honor code violations or reprimands, expulsion? I mean, what's the penalty if you turn in a work that's, determined that it was written by AI, or is there any repercussion right now? What would happen today if a student does it? Anna, has your school done anything that would make students think there's a harsh penalty for doing this?
I think it's still ambiguous, and there's a lot of debate among teachers, but most schools, I think, including my school, would include it under the umbrella of the academic integrity policy. So there could potentially be those consequences. But I think there's also a move among teachers to say, let's question a punitive approach. And we want to sort of work with students to understand this, and to understand what the guidelines should be, and to even develop with students collaboratively some norms around it, and discuss what the policy should be, because most students do want to still learn, and they still see the need for critical thinking. These systems generate something that sounds good, but when you need to make a decision about what you're going to do in the real world or advocate for something, think through what's at stake, you still need your own critical thinking. And even OpenAI says that you shouldn't use the tool unless you have the expertise to evaluate critically what it's giving you. So I think that I haven't seen severe academic penalties yet. I think the possibility is there, and I do caution students, because even if I don't give a punitive approach, the next teacher might. And even if their essay is not detected right now as AI text, I mean, who knows? It shouldn't be considered private information that when we use AI, I think. We should be ready to disclose that. And maybe 2 years down the line, there'll be a better detection system. Right. Or the company will be keeping track of everything system generates. So I sort of, I don't know if Dr. Basgier would think that's too, that I'm trying to scare students, but to me, it's also sort of a realistic caution that, we're human. There is a temptation sometimes, I feel, to just say, maybe it will just write my next sentence. But then I ask myself, okay, but am I willing to footnote that as from ChatGPT? So yeah. I'll
Okay.
pause.
Dr. Basgier, where's Auburn come down on this right now?
Yeah, so I think if I'm correct, in and of itself, generative AI hasn't been named in the academic honesty policy. Instead, it's treated on a course by course or department by department basis,
Wow,
which
okay.
is to say that the bottom line is faculty have to say explicitly in their syllabus that it is prohibited for them to use it either completely or unacknowledged. And then it can rise to the level of academic misconduct. But if the individual faculty member doesn't explicitly prohibit it, then they're saying, you didn't say no, so it can't rise to that level.
That seems very gray that it's, on a college campus. And I know we're talking to a lot of teachers at the secondary level. Do you feel like it would be better if there was a top down, I don't care what class it is, what discipline, what grade, it's like, this is the way, this is the rule. Would it be better to have an all-encompassing policy?
Well, one thing you got to understand is the Auburn University context is very decentralized. So that's one reason that it's working that way. They try to keep a lot of the power in faculty and the departments rather than centralizing power. But I think this goes back to what Anna was saying about detection, right? As you start to move students through the centralized academic misconduct channels, you have to have proof. And there are no fail-safe detectors right now. The best one is OpenAI's, and it only gets it right 25% of the time with a 9% false positive rate. So that's just not enough to go on to be able to say this was definitely produced by AI. What's usually better, and what I recommend to faculty, is if it smells funny, it probably is funny. Use your nose. And sit the student down, talk to them about, how did you come up with this idea? How did you produce it? If they relied wholesale on ChatGPT, they're not going to be able to explain their process, just like with any other kind of plagiarism in most cases.
Right.
And then, you can ask them point blank. If they dig their heels in or deny, you can ask them to redo it. Chances are it's not going to really be making or meeting the assignment criteria in some way, shape, or form anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
A couple of questions from the Q&A. And this, I'll ask Dr. Basgier, because you mentioned that you appreciate that we have an interpreter right now. The question from Carolyn Cage: do you see AI being used as an accommodation for students with disabilities, the way text-to-speech has been used? Do you have any thoughts on that?
So I haven't seen that in practice, but I think I can imagine it happening. For example, a student who might have a verbal processing disorder that maybe makes it difficult for them to compose, maybe after they write, they can put it into, ChatGPT and have it polish it up, right, to correct spelling errors or grammatical errors. And it can do that. There's still a bit of caution there. It's actually been known to insert brand new sentences that were never there before and that might not be totally relevant. So there's still problems with it as a full-blown accommodation. I think what we'll probably more likely to see is there's a phenomenon called small language models that's coming out that is supposed to be sort of smaller instances of AI for very specific use cases. And I could imagine some ADA support kind of style AI platforms that might come out in the long run.
Interesting. Question from Tracy Speaker. This is for Anna. I'll start with you. She said, I think there's some value to using AI. Can you talk about what might be some of the strengths of using AI in the classroom?
Well, I think there is potential connected to the disability question, but also it kind of opens up access to a language of power to some extent, to standard English.
Yes, I see that.
And so I think that that's a huge practical help. I think it can be used to help us extend our thinking. It can be used in a collaborative way.
How would it extend thinking?
For example, if I write a brainstorm and then I say to it, what's not clear here? Or what would be a counter argument to this? Or what questions might readers have? it's going to come up with things that might make me think. Some of them might be wrong or dumb. Some of them might be, I might think, yes, that's something that I've kind of thought of, but now I can develop it, or I can correct what ChatGPT has given me. So it can be a stimulus and kind of a partner in a thinking process if you're intending to use it that way. And I think that, so we can use it in that way, but I think you have to do it very intentionally, and we would have to teach that approach.
Yeah. Dr. Basgier, do you want to add anything about how you think it could augment the learning instead of us always running away from it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would very much echo what Anna has said. I've known people who have already started using it, for example, for outlining. So help me develop an initial outline for this, and then I'm going to take it and fill it out myself, right? And so I've seen some students using it for that way. So it helps them kind of get their ideas organized on paper, and then they can take it from there and make it their own in that way. I have a colleague in education leadership who's having her students use it to create professional learning plans that, so it gives them kind of the initial draft based on their professional goals as they want to move into, secondary administration, and then they kind of add to it, build on it based on specific contextual factors as well.
Okay.
So it can be an aid to that sort of reflective practice as well.
Thank you. And you want to make one more point on that?
Yeah, I think that just the caution is that since it is kind of so much more powerful than just a grammar checker, it can sort of take the place of thinking or change the thinking or the intention in the text. So, even if I've heard people with disabilities say, it might seem to help me communicate, but it doesn't actually know what I'm thinking. It doesn't actually know what it is I'm trying to formulate. So there's a risk, there's always this risk that it's going to, and maybe I wouldn't even notice, but it's going to spit out a paragraph that sounds good. And so I go with it, but actually that isn't where I was going.
Sure. Sure.
So watching for that.
I might just also add that, Anna pointed out, it can give access to that language of power of standard English, and it'll spit out this really polished writing. And it has made me wonder whether this might actually make us appreciate messy writing a little bit more as a record of thinking on the page. Yeah. Messy writing is maybe not this. I don't mean the same thing as bad writing, but rather that kind of generative writing where we're trying to do that critical thinking work. Figure out what it is we actually have to say about a subject.
Yeah, it's like when you write it the first time and then you come back and clean it up. It's like sort of stream of consciousness, like you just put it on paper. So we have just a remaining few minutes in this conversation. We could probably talk for weeks on this, and I'm sure we will, and years as society. But we have a lot of folks here at the local and state levels. From your perspective, and I'll start with Anna, do you think it would be useful for a state education office, for example, or a school division to produce a sort of document stating these are our policies, these are some recommendations of use? Everybody's kind of grabbing at what do I do? Should there be more centralized policy manuals of sorts for educators to refer to at their school or their state? What would you like to see over the next 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, I think people are wanting more of that kind of guidance. And I think that any such guidance needs to sort of be provisional and show how it is going to engage with feedback from students, from teachers, from pedagogical experts on what's happening in the classroom, how the technology is changing. It's not at its endpoint. It's going to keep evolving pretty rapidly. So I think I loved the model from Lance Eaton at College Unbound that he developed a policy with his students that they then proposed to the college, and the college looked at it and decided to adopt it provisionally and then to reassess at a certain point. So I think kind of looking forward to a kind of an open process. Let's get some guidance, but let's also envision how we're going to continue to evolve with this and incorporate people's ideas, because nobody does have the one right answer. So I think we've got to keep turning toward each other and keep reflecting on it. But we also, a lot of people are just feeling lost and that they don't
Right.
have the resources to figure it out on their own.
Right. Dr.
so-
Basgier, do you want to add to that? Like, moving forward, how do we sort of centralize the conversation?
Yeah, I definitely understand the desire for policy, and I don't want to sound like I'm saying don't do policy, but I actually think pedagogy and professional development are probably more important at this stage, because we don't know everything and it is evolving so quickly. It'll be built into Microsoft Office by the end of the year, for example. And that's going to change the way all of us engage with generative AI. And so I think the more we can be learning together intentionally, the better off we're all going to be. And then policy can emerge. Eric Briggs put this in the chat a little bit. The experience is going to come from teachers in the trenches, right? Those of us who are doing the work are going to have I think the best sense of what works and what doesn't work and where the problems are arising.
Wow. I think that's a great way to sort of try to put a cap on a very large, expansive conversation. I want to remind everybody briefly of what I mentioned at the beginning. If you missed it, and again, if you're new to the Rubin community in our webinar series, we love giving out free resources. We have a Google Drive folder of free exercises for email etiquette, some of which ChatGPT might help correct in time, but right now we're still a lot of misunderstanding among young people about what emails are for. And so if you'd like some free activities to use in the classroom or to prepare for next school year, all you have to do is go to the chat right now, type the word interested and your email address, and we will send it to you. And as I mentioned, if you're new to our community, we love to just chat for a minute, say hello, understand where you're teaching, what you're doing, and then you can share that resource as well with other teachers in your school or your school district. So if you'd like these resources, please request them and we will get them to you as soon as possible. Again, I really appreciate our guests being here. I do think you offered some very practical answers to a conversation that, as Dr. Basgier said, is still very much evolving. And we're not exactly sure what the rules and regulations should be. And you said we should continue to discuss it and collaborate together. And I hope that we were able to do that today. So thank you both for your time very much. I know you're very busy on your respective campuses. And thank you, Wendy, for your time. Thank you, everyone, for all of your questions. We hope you'll join us on May 9th to talk to a welder. Maybe we'll mix in some AI there too. I don't know what the welding community feels about AI yet, but we're going to find out. So again, thank you all. And I hope you have a great rest of your week. And we will see you in May. Thanks again.